Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank Kames and Hufs, all of the other sponsors for this program, for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to take a little bit of time and talk to you about U.S. and Turkish relations. I'm going to try to fly through this because I didn't realize this would be such an important subject when I started to do research on this a few months ago. Things have changed in the last month. So we're going to kind of go through a lot today. I'm going to try to go through some of the specifics on how we got to this point, and then take a view from 40,000 feet and maybe give a little bit of overall perspective on where we can go next. Research questions were the foundations of the alliance, what are the origins of the current rift, and how bad is that rift? So I'm going to go through this pretty fast. Essentially, this is a strategic defensive alliance. It started at the end of World War II, and it remained so until, I'd say very recently, a coherent strategic alliance. So essentially, the Soviet Union was encroaching on Turkish lands, and the United States wanted to stop any Soviet encroachment into the energy-rich Middle East. So this strategic partnership has, over the years, been pretty solid, with plenty of setbacks, ranging from what happened in Cyprus, both in '64 and in '73, to in 2003 when the 4th Division wasn't allowed to open up a northern front in Iraq during the invasion. However, by and large, the relationship has been strong. Right here in the circled area, you have Incirlik, which has been a crucial U.S. base for operations all over the region since the early 90s. It's also where you have 50 B-61 nuclear weapons that essentially are an umbrella for Turkey, a nuclear umbrella, which prevents any proliferation by the state of Turkey as well. Okay, so my argument. The argument consists, it's based around the siege of Kobani in 2014. So in 2014, this happened in the fall. The threat perception by both states were as follows. It was the PKK and PYD for Turkey, as the PYD had just recently announced that the 3 autonomous cannons in northern Syria, which were kind of a predecessor, what Turkey thought was a predecessor to a contiguous entity on its southern border. For the U.S., it was the rise of ISIS. ISIS for the U.S. Essentially brings back the memories of 9/11. It's an evolution of Al-Qaeda in groups that pose a somewhat permanent threat to the United States. So as the United States and Turkey were looking at these two threats, they solved these threats, they combated these threats with mutual detrimental actions. These actions ended up kind of compounding on one another in a multiplying effect, which has led to where we are now, which is a kind of a self-perpetuating strategic divergence. Right now, they just don't agree on very much, and the strategic partnership bilaterally doesn't work very well. So let's talk about how we got there. These are your perceived threats. Okay, so we have to look at how the United States looks at the Kurds. And I say Kurds in quotations here because we don't collectively, when I say this, I'm talking about the media, I'm talking about in Congress. There's not a very nuanced opinion of what the Kurds are. You see this from leaders in the executive and in the legislature consistently homogenizing the Kurds, not really differentiating between, say, PUK Peshmerga, KDP Peshmerga, or PKK Peshmerga, or the PYD, or their fighting forces, the YPJ and the YPG. So this homogenization, unfortunately, I think has led to a slightly delusional idea about what the Kurds are. We can't really go into that in full detail right now, but there's a somewhat romanticized notion that's brought up currently in the current narrative of how we are going to treat them and how we even got into treating them in 2014. So this romanticized notion is kind of what you see in the press when you see women fighters going against ISIS and stuff like this. You know, they're kind of a bastion of something that we would want to exist in an area where it doesn't exist very much. So this is kind of imposing a solidarity. But when you look at these collectively, how victimhood, battleship friendly over years in northern Iraq as well, and the Kurds representing this secular entity in northern Syria, you have an immense sympathy and solidarity within the legislature and within the American populace with the Kurds, whether that be justified or not. And it's imposing a solidarity, it's imposing a homogenous identity on Kurds, which I don't believe are homogenous at all. But what this yields is, with this sympathy and with how things changed in early 2014 when the U.S. stopped looking for groups to train and arm, they looked to start, they were looking for established groups, established fighting forces in northern Syria to combat ISIS. When you look at the Battle of Kobani, it basically set up a good versus evil type situation. If you look at the equation that I wrote right here, the YPG was a capable potential tactical ally versus what the U.S. looked at as a civilizational evil. So once the calculation came to arm or not arm the PYD in northern Syria, you had to look at it from the U.S. point of view in that they saw the particular potential ally, while Turkey essentially formed a northern flank. They formed a fourth flank in the battle. They stopped Kurds from being able to, they stopped the civilian population of Kobani from being able to flee to Turkey. And they also didn't allow Turkish troops or Turkish Kurds to come in and help fight in Kobani. So this kind of nullified their objection to arming the PYD. So when things came down to it, that was the decision, that was the calculus that was made by the United States. Now, there has to be some context put into this. This happened in 2014, but in earnest, the actual arming of the SDF, which is the umbrella group under which the PYD is fighting, this really started in earnest in 2015. Now, in 2015, the ceasefire with the PKK stopped. So you had, in the southeast, you had a very violent war of secession going on. And essentially, from a Kurdish point, from a Turkish point of view, the United States was arming the group of people who were making this insurgency happen in the southeast. So that decision to arm the PYD forces in northern Syria, and from a Turkish point of view, is looked at as one and the same as arming the PKK. Okay, so when we look at the Turks, their way of combating the threat in the PYD. First off, you have to look at how important Eastern Anatolia is to the Turkish state. We're talking about billions of dollars of investment. Strategically, it's a natural buffer through its mountains. It also, the geography that it holds there, it stops a threat from coming from either Iran or Iraq. You also have the headwaters of the Tigris and the Euphrates there, which gives it an advantage, leverage over Syria and Iraq as far as water rights go. Additionally, both Eastern Anatolia and Southeastern Anatolia projects yield an absolute ton of energy in an energy-poor state, and a lot of jobs. So the Southeast can't really be underestimated. The hydroelectric energy that's produced from there, the jobs, the natural buffer zone, means that the territorial integrity that they're protecting there is also a deep security threat. Now, when you look at ISIS down at the bottom of the equation, ISIS at that point in time, strategically, they were looking for chaos. They weren't looking to fight against NATO's second biggest military. They didn't stand a chance. The Turkish military didn't really feel much of a threat from ISIS in 2014. So that calculation went into basically, when they looked at the siege of Kobani, they saw an enemy of the state fighting someone who didn't want to fight them. So their calculus was very different than the United States. So when you combine that with the domestic policy, the domestic vote-seeking strategies that changed in 2014 when they took a turn closer to the MHP, to the nationalist parties in Turkey. This made that the U.S. and NATO's desire to see Turkey step up its actions against ISIS, it didn't outweigh the threat posed by the PYD and the domestic potential advantage that the AKP could get from aligning with more nationalistic and anti-Kurdish movements in Syria. Okay, so the idea of compounding threats and multiplying adversarial activities. So we have to put the 2016 coup in its proper place as well. It's something that the United States has not articulated. It's never shown quite maybe the remorse for its actions or lack thereof that it needs to. So as the country had just been through two sets of elections in 2015 where the AKP garnered approximately 50% of the vote. The ceasefire had ended, and you still had a war of secession going on in the southeast. And on top of that, ISIS is losing land in Iraq and Syria. It was creating a balloon effect, right? So when you think about a coup that's going to happen in a state that's 50-50, people are going to fight about it. It's easy to assume that. During that vacuum or that chaos, the PKK would obviously make a bigger claim on lands in the southeast. And that kind of chaos would almost certainly invite ISIS to come and take advantage of the situation. So these together really posed an existential threat to the state of Turkey. And when we combine that with Fethullah Gulen, who's the alleged mastermind of that coup, along with the judicial coup in 2014, he lives in Pennsylvania, and he's being protected by the United States. From a Turkish point of view, this, of course, these things compound on top of one another, and it doesn't look like there's much strategic congruence at all between the two states. From the U.S. point of view, hostage diplomacy. We've had several people taken hostage. Okay, thank you. By Turkey. Erdogan's security guards came in. There's been threats to U.S. citizens, both home and abroad. When we look at the S-400s and Erdogan and Putin, the S-400s from a U.S. point of view is a bit of a stab in the back. We've tried to sell Patriot missiles, and that hasn't worked out, I guess. And going to Russia for that type of defense by a NATO ally is counterintuitive to the idea of NATO. As far as Erdogan and Putin goes, I think there needs to be a book about this more than me in 2 minutes. But to put it very simply, Putin is much better at handling Turkey than any U.S. president has been, especially under Erdogan. He gets it. He doesn't condescend. He's not lecturing. He treats them as an equal, and there have been resounding effects to this. Much better than the United States constantly telling Turkey what to do. So let's look at where we are. Obviously, in the United States, things aren't good. These are more recent polls. Public opinion of Turkey, public opinion of Erdogan, and our opinion of what we should do with the Kurds, which, of course, is it serves as the Kurds in northern Syria serve as a threat to Turkey. More importantly, I would say in Congress and in the executive branch, we've had several different pieces of legislation in both the House and the Senate, resolutions condemning Turkey. Of the Turkish caucus, the Turkish caucus is about 109 members. 99 of them, I believe, voted for the recognition of the Armenian genocide, which is a hotly contested issue. So I think you're really losing a massive amount of support in what was not too long ago the U.S. Congress that supported Turkey in most affairs. Additionally, I would say that Turkey is getting caught up in the vitriolic nature of U.S. politics right now. When I say that, I mean that anytime you find yourself aligning with Trump right now, you're guilty of being aligned with Trump. So when Erdogan's meeting with Trump, people are going to go at that because he's meeting with Trump. Because if there's a perceived friendship there, it's wrong because it was with him. The nation's very divided on whether you're pro or anti-Trump, and this is kind of having an effect on how Turkey's being looked at in polls. Okay, one thing we got to go real fast, so I'm going to fly through this. In the middle, this is the biggest one, I think. The United States is not only not looked at favorably, but it's the biggest threat to Turkey in public opinion polls. 10% higher, 10 percentage points higher than Israel. And this number steadily increased since 2015 when we started arming the PYD, from 35 to 81, not just a slight increase. As far as the government goes, it's just about daily when you look at reports saying that there's another vitriolic statement coming out of the Turkish government about the United States, sometimes threatening, sometimes just dismissive. So in conclusion, we're at a state where this is kind of self-imposed strategic divergence, and it keeps compiling on top of each other and getting worse and worse in kind of a slow-moving downward spiral. Now, where can we go? So I think you have three options here. Both countries can cooperate which is kind of costly. They both invested against each other right now. So by cooperating, that's immediately leaving the PYD, which was attempted, about 2 months ago, but yesterday we were running missions with them in northeastern Syria. You could end the partnership, which of course would be dangerous and costly for both, and I think would be unpopular domestically in the long run. Or we can use the same notion, the same idea that we used during the Cyprus crisis in 1974, 1975, when the U.S. put an arms embargo for 3 years. U.S. forces were kicked out of the country, other than NATO forces who are operating under the auspices of NATO. So we've been in worse situations than when we're in right now. However, in order for option number 3 to be viable, the U.S. is going to have to come to a certain grips with a few things, and I'll sum this up in 1 minute. So first off, we need to come to grips with what we think of Kurdish entities. If we're going to take the PKK off of the list that we have them on, which in 1997 we designated them terrorist, in 2001 special designated global terrorist, in 2007 an enemy of the state, in 2008 a significant narcotics trafficker. The PYD and the PKK are the different sides of the same coin. We're going to have to come to grips with this. This is something that's somewhat indefensible. Also, I think U.S. and NATO alike are going to have to tone down their rhetoric. Erdogan is not going backwards to the type of Turkish state that's going to acquiesce to some sort of pressure. He's going to be independently strong, and he's not going to be lectured anymore. And also, I think Turkey is going to have to weigh out its closeness with Russia against its future plans with NATO and the United States. So that's all I have for you. I ran through that about as fast as I can. Thank you very much.